certainly one of the big stories we are tracking for you. South Africa's economy is on a downward spiral, with the latest numbers from Statistics South Africa showing that things are even worse than predicted by both National Treasury and the Reserve Bank. The COVID-19 pandemic has resulted in weak economic activity in the second quarter. Treasury now needs to salvage the situation and at the same time stop more losses through corruption. To speak to us more about what the fiscal policy may look like come mid-term budget and how the department is rooting out corruption, we're joined now by the Director-General of National Treasury, Dondo Mogajane. DG, thanks very much for your time on the AM report as always. I mean, just as a first question, our economy was already in the doldrums pre-COVID-19. The question now is, how does the economy a recovery plan look? What does it look like post-COVID-19?
Thank you, Michelle, for having me, and good morning to your viewers. Yes, Michelle, earlier on you were saying that the National Economic Recovery Plan is being crafted and the President obviously is expected to announce on it. Yes, we are working flat out in tying loose ends of that, and I know there was a discussion yesterday with network partners to finalize and work on it, and as soon as that is ready, obviously the President will come through. But look, there are things that we've been working on, that we are aware of, that we've been working on from day one, that every South African and everyone knows about. And these are measures around to support fiscal and economic reforms that we all know are critical to boost the economy. Yeah. What are they? We have been talking about boosting confidence. We have been talking about ensuring that the structural reforms are put in place, and then we have to actually make sure that we implement it, and speedily so. And I think what we need to do is to pick up the low-hanging fruit and work on those and move on. And at least one believes that we should be able to recover from the challenges that we've always had if we get it right.
So what is some of that low-hanging fruit? I see that corruption is certainly high up on the agenda in terms of plugging the holes in the economy. Public finances as well, also already in a shambles pre-COVID-19. Now surely our public finances severely overstretched.
Thank you. No, we need to, those reforms firstly need to support economic investment and ensure that there's employment. They must raise productivity and competitiveness, and also lowering the cost of doing business. Now, those are broad areas that we need to touch on. Look, network industries remain as a whole on their own an important area to focus on. Network industries will talk about infrastructure investments and finalize what's needed to be done. The whole ESCOM restructuring and bundling process must start to show and bear some fruit. Also, we have to modernize our ports and rail infrastructure, and also look at licensing spectrum. We have released spectrum, sometime just before COVID, but there are possibilities and opportunities that when we do this and we do this properly, we can actually get out of. So I've just mentioned three for now. They are critical, they're important. We all know that if we improve the importation and exportation of goods, that on its own can really have impact and then boost the infrastructure, as I said, build the roads that are needed, the critical roads, repair infrastructure, repair rail infrastructure that is damaged, focus on that, make sure that we do those things. Now, those are on the network industry side. Now, you were talking about corruption. Corruption on its own obviously siphons money away in critical resources that will actually make meaningful investments in the economy. So what we do, I think we are working with the fusion center, as you heard the announcement of the fusion center some time ago. A multifaceted approach is used there, where all law enforcement agencies are in, whether you're talking about the FIC, whether you're talking about the Hawks, you're talking about the SIU, you're talking about the Treasury, you're talking about for the Specialized Audit Service in our unit. We actually are part of that, and I'm making sure that they are supported in a way that we can firstly deal with corruption, and secondly be able to ensure that we release the resources that are critical. And I always say, Michelle, that we obviously cannot budget on the basis of stolen money. That's not possible. Yeah. However, we need to deal with this and grab the money, and let's make the money available, and then reallocate that money to appropriate programs that will boost our economic investments and address poverty challenges.
I mean, DG, as you're explaining the situation to us, these are very, very broad strokes that you're talking about here. our ports, fixing our roads, lowering the cost of doing business. For South Africans who are still in shock, given those Stats SA numbers from last week, what are the timelines we're looking at here for a post-COVID economy to recover in South Africa?
What I know that the impact of reforms that I'm talking about is going to be seen later. It's going to take time. I mean, it's proven around the world that when reforms such as those are implemented, it's going to take time. And it's important, I think, and what we are planning on is to really make sure in the recovery plan that we're talking about, it has to have timelines in it. We have to have a given idea when we're finally going to deal with spectrum, and I think those details will come through at the appropriate time. And we'll have to make sure that we actually have a timetable of some kind. And that's what we're talking in the economic cluster. That's what we talked about last night with some of the partners in NET, like that, how critical it is that whatever we do, we have to take South Africans on board, and there must be expectations, and they must actually, as government, hold us accountable on some of the things that we do. So the details of which obviously will come through, as I said, when the President announces this. Some of the details, you mentioned that we are planning and preparing for the medium-term budget policy statement that's coming in October, which is traditional, that in there we kind of come up with broad national estimates in terms of where we see our GDP, where we see our debt to GDP, where we see our fiscal deficit targets and so on. So we will basically outline some of those in October when we present the medium-term budget policy statement around the third week of October.
Yeah. I mean, in the meantime, what can you tell us about an issue like our revenue shortfall, which the minister tells us will amount to some 300 billion rand? That's the expected shortfall for this year, about 6% of GDP. How is the medium-term budget policy statement going to address that?
Look, firstly, the medium-term statement will outline a number, a revised number, based on the targets and the implementation from the time we announced this in June to around October. Because SARS is working flat out, obviously, to collect, and it could either be more or it could be less in terms of the shortfall that we're looking at. But however, the details, as I say, we can only announce that, and the number on the revenue side will actually impact on the deficit, and there's a number that the markets, it's a market-sensitive number that I think everyone is waiting for. So normally, that's why I want to put certainty in the system that we can only do it at the time of the appropriation. So in terms of the actual details, we'll announce that. What are we going to do to actually get that? We also know that, expenditure and revenue go hand in hand. And expenditure and revenue on its own gives South Africans what we want. We either can expand on our social services, expand on our infrastructure investments, and if we do that and we have got a thriving economy, people then pay taxes. Private sector pay taxes, and in that way, we're able to boost on the revenue side. So it's a function of how quickly the economy turns around. It's a function of how quickly do we open the economy to a point where tax revenues are going to become through. You all know that, for instance, on the tobacco and alcohol sales, closing down the economy simply meant at the time that we don't get those necessary excise duties that we normally would get. So revenues are not coming through. By opening up on Thursdays and Fridays, and all of the things that that we did in the last couple of months will actually make sure that the revenue comes. That's an example. But it is then generally important that we actually make sure that business comes back to normal in South Africa, where economic activity becomes normal, and then in that way, value in businesses will be generated, and that value will translate into tax revenues coming through in our coffers. DG,
it certainly sounds like Treasury is in support of a move to level 1 of the lockdown.
Look, anyone, any South African, any government, any president would be willing and wishing that we did not have level 5, 4, 3, 2, but we're only on level 1. But however, we know the pandemic that we have to deal with. Now, it is not wrong to have that expectation. It's not wrong to have that wish, because for me, where I sit with my team in the Treasury, level 1 can only mean good economic activity that will bring in the much needed tax revenues. So we all wish that we get there quickly, but however, we also have to balance that against ensuring that the pandemic is contained in the way that we have been successful as a country in ensuring that the pandemic is successful. And all our efforts, as you know, have been around supporting health, supporting the NCCC, the National Command Corona Council, chaired by the President. We've been supporting all of those efforts. Whether we pronounce level 5 or level 2 or level 1, we are behind what the NCCC is behind because we play a role in that. But our wish remains that we have to open the economy so that tax revenues can come through and we're able to do what we have to do as a country, ensure that we create jobs, we make interventions around poverty alleviation and make sure that we get back to normal as an economy. And we cannot do that alone. We need to do that obviously with business, with civil society and with labor on the side.
Dondo Mogajane, thanks as always for your time here on the AM Report. He is Director-General in the Department of Treasury. And of course, this is as we continue to reflect on what a post-COVID-19 economy will look like in South Africa. GDP plunging by a record 16.4% in the second quarter of this year.